Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of HistoHelp, NSH's popular podcast that brings tips, tricks, and advice on all those pesky problems you're facing in the lab. Season 1 was a huge hit, and this season is going to keep the good times rolling. We will be chatting with histo legends like Cliff Chapman and Mary Buell, Dave Krull, our unofficial guru on tech, industry partner, and maybe your new best friend when it comes to equipment know-how, Matt Mincer, and NSH members Lynn Grumman and Candace Smoots, whose sound, tips, and advice will really help your lab maintain those high standards. So sit back for a few minutes and enjoy. Hi, this is Connie, and I'm sitting once again with David Krull, NSH member and podcast star from Season 1 of HistoHelp. In the fall, I sat down and spoke with Dave about the concepts of disruptive technology. We talked about what it is, how it is looking, and how it's looked in the past. If you recall, Dave, we even talked about how we used to listen to the radio and use tape cassettes, and now we have all of our music on our phones. And then also, especially in the lab, the types of disruptive technologies that were once disruptive but are now part of everyday life in the lab, and what Dave was seeing in the future, what would be disruptive in the future. We also tried to put some people at ease by talking about why disruptive technology is a good thing, despite its kind of overwhelming name.
Right.
So I thought this, with the popularity of that episode, I thought it'd be a great idea to break down one of those technologies that you saw as coming into the future. And one of those was artificial intelligence, or AI, as I like to think the cool kids say.
Yep.
Now, as I was just telling you before, Dave, I have very little knowledge of AI. For me, when I think of that phrasing, it conjures up images of robots and like a Back to the Future movie for some reason.
Absolutely.
But just before we got on this call here, I just Googled really quickly AI, which I said, how is AI in our everyday lives? And
Don't
it was amazing.
Steal my thunder. Don't steal my thunder.
I won't. But just doing the process of Googling, I realized I was using AI. So, so I thought, if you don't mind talking a little bit about just what AI is, and then we can talk about where you're seeing that in the lab, or where you think it's going to be coming in the lab, or maybe it's already there and I don't know it.
Absolutely. It's just snuck up on you. You weren't even aware. Just like when you use Google and you said, wow, I'm actually using machine learning and artificial intelligence. And I just want to state that you are a cool kid.
Thank you.
Not just because you used AI, but just in general. So,
and this is recorded, so everyone knows it now.
Just for the record, and thank you for inviting me to come back and focus on this particular topic of AI. I am by no means an expert in this area. I recognize that this is something that we are beginning to use quite a bit now in my lab, and it's something that we've had a lot of conversations, both internally and externally, with people that are really key opinion leaders in this area. And really, like you said, when you hear the word AI, you think of Back to the Future or Transformers and things like that, right? Or the Borg from Star Trek.
Yes.
Part of a collective. And really, AI is just using computers to automate processes that typically were done by people. Right. So if we look at the field of histology, we've been using some machine learning, some computer methods like image analysis for some time now. And it was really to augment a lot of the work that pathologists were doing in a manual way. So they would put these H&Es, and they still do this, H&Es or IHC slides, and they would do some kind of a feature assessment. So they'd look at the morphology, they look at the cell types, they do some manual recording in words, has a summary of what they were saying. Was there inflammation? How many inflammatory cells are in a particular area? What the structure of the tissue looked like? that type of thing. And then for the IHC, they would do a numerical scoring of +1, +2, +3, etc., to kind of classify the intensity of a particular cell type or analyte that was being labeled. And now what we've done with image analysis is we take it a step further and do some manual annotations or semi-automated annotations where we classify different regions of the tissue based upon the morphology or based upon the IHC analysis that we've done. For instance, with DAB, we might want to capture all the brown cells and be able to do some thresholding on the intensity of those cells, and then export all that information to a spreadsheet. And where we are with AI is now we're taking that image analysis approach and automating that. So we're having the computer learn how to do that classification itself.
That's right.
And
I remember you all talking a lot about that in the digital pathology program.
That's right.
Quite a few folks that in those lectures, they're talking about that. Interesting.
Yep. So we actually give the software training sets. So we annotate specific different cell types, and then we go through a process where the software will look at what we've classified, and then it tries to apply that same classification to other features that are like it within that tissue sample. So we show it a subset, and then we have it apply that same concept to the rest of the sample. And it does it by a pixel by pixel basis. So it's actually looking at the subcellular level. So it's actually looking at the individual pixels that make up a particular image, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And if you really zoom into an image, if you artificially enlarge an image, you can see those little blocks, right?
Yes.
And each of those blocks actually has a specific color and intensity associated with it, a color palette and intensity associated with it. And the software is tuned to recognize those differences. So differences that we may not even appreciate by eye. And I love this recent article that came out in The Scientist in May of 2019. And it says, artificial intelligence sees more in microscopy than humans do. So it can really look very closely at these subcellular features and use that to classify the objects. And there's a software package that we use in our lab from Indica Labs. It's called Halo, and that has an AI feature as well. And we're using that to try to classify tumors. So we want to understand the stroma versus the actual tumor, and then any associated tissue that we don't want to measure, such as muscle tissue or connective tissue. And we want to just focus on the tumor cells themselves and look at the immune cells within that area. And so we have developed an algorithm using AI to classify the tumor and then also measure the individual immune cells within the tumor. And that's through the multiplex IHC or immunofluorescence approaches that we're also developing. And it's a big topic as well with the NSH. So,
yes, it is. Now, can I ask you a question, Dave? So you're
sure.
talking about the Halo this program Halo that you use in the AI feature. Was it difficult to grasp the concept of what it was doing or even use the software? I mean, I don't want to speak, I'm not trying to speak on this specific software, but I mean, just in a global way, like, is it a different mindset you have to get into when you are using this kind of technology, or is it really feel very intuitive about what you're looking at?
That's a great question. So the GUI or the user interface, which is what they call it, is something that is something that's really different from one software to another. And if you go back to how the software is designed, it's really designed by some really intelligent machine learning people, right? They understand computational biology, they understand script writing and things like Python. So they are programmers. They don't necessarily have to be biologists, but they have to understand how to write all this code. And thankfully, they do all this coding and develop these algorithms, and then has a nice user interface where we just have to tell the software what we want to do with pull down menus and things like that. So we understand the biology, and then we can use this tool that this engineer has created and apply it to the tissue. So the user experience is very, very nice, because we don't have to understand machine learning and Python programming.
Wow.
So
that's great.
Yeah, and many software companies are developing this. It's not just Indica Labs. I know Visiopharm and other software companies as well are focused on this application, and some whole businesses are designed around this type of approach with artificial intelligence. And we actually had a speaker. I don't remember the last year that they spoke, but it was Andrew Beck. Do you remember Andrew Beck?
I do. St. Louis.
Yeah, from
2018. From
thank you.
Path AI.
Path AI, very good. I tried to do a quick search, and I couldn't find the year and location, but yeah, that's right. So Path AI has actually made a business out of applying machine learning and then this AI approach, and these neural networks is another term that you'll hear, or deep learning, and they're applying it to millions of images. So they're going beyond what I was talking about, my own projects in the lab, to looking at H&Es and even unstained tissue sections, and being able to apply classifications based on morphology or the intensity or other characteristics in the sections, in the unstained as well as stained samples. And actually pathologists are coming together, and they're annotating the images in hopes of training the AI software to do an even better job than the individual pathologist would do on their own.
So you just said an interesting phrase, and I feel like we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but you said training the software.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so that's another good question. So like when I was saying about teaching it, so I circle areas or make annotations on the images to tell the software what that particular area is. So like I was mentioning with the tumor, I might want to tell it what the tumor cells are by highlighting those, and I might want to identify muscle tissue and connective tissue by highlighting those areas a different color. And then the machine will go through its algorithm and identify the categories of the unannotated image, and then I will proofread it. So I will go back and look and see how it did, and go back and correct any mistakes it made, and say, no, that was incorrectly classified. You thought it was tumor, but it's actually stroma. And I would reclassify it and then have it train again. And so the level of, they call it entropy, or the level of change, decreases over time. So the more training sets you give it, the better and better the software is at correctly identifying those structures. And the more examples you give it, the better it becomes as well.
Okay, makes total sense. Yeah, so it gives the machine the opportunity to have more data to make those better classifications, or identifying things more accurately based on the training you're giving. Interesting. It's like training a person.
Yeah, it is. And the other interesting thing is how can we use this? And in the drug development world, we're constantly looking at toxicology, right? We'll do toxicology testing, and we want to know if any of our drugs are causing adverse effects. That's one of the screening types that we do to make sure that our medicines are safe. And the pathologist will look at a lot of normal tissue. They'll screen hundreds or thousands of slides. A lot of them are normal, because thankfully the drugs that we're developing are more and more safe and cause less toxicity, because we've identified what makes drugs toxic, and we try not to make those type of drugs. And so to have a software that could look at hundreds or thousands of digital images and classify things as not being normal would be really helpful, or anything that maybe falls slightly askew of what was considered normal. And that's how they talk about money, for instance. You don't teach somebody to recognize counterfeit money by showing them a number of counterfeit dollars. You really train them to recognize what a real dollar looks like, what an authentic dollar looks like, and they really scrutinize it to a very high degree, so that when a counterfeit does come along, they'll recognize it very quickly. And that's what we're doing with this AI approach. If we can train it with thousands or hundreds of thousands of normal tissue samples, it will recognize patterns that may indicate that there's an abnormality or there's some kind of a toxic effect that was due to the drug.
Okay, makes sense. That's really exciting to hear how that is evolving into the way that it reaches our lives.
And the pathologist would still go back and they would do a QC. So they would go back and check and see if some of those were flagged correctly or incorrectly, and that information would then be fed back into the software to make it even better and better over time.
It's like the more obviously the more information it gets, the more it learns and the more precise it can become.
Yep. And so I think that's where we're going in the long term. But in the near term, where we're using AI is like I said, in trying to classify the different regions of the tissue or subcompartments, and then measuring the cells within those compartments.
So we've talked a little bit about that particular type of how that the AI technology is going in and how you're seeing it in your world. Is there anything, you're in a research setting, is there anything that you see has already, we talked about Google being, make sure I'm articulating this right. Where am I seeing this here and now, Dave? I'm at the hospital, I'm working in a lab at the hospital. Are we seeing this technology frequently already, or is it something that's coming?
So it is being applied in the clinical lab as well. There is actually a recent paper that came out. The title is kind of confusing if you just read it at face value, but it's in a Nature publication, and it's focused on breast cancer, and it says, application of convolutional neural networks to breast biopsies to delineate tissue correlates of mammography breast density.
Okay. There were a few syllables I got lost at, but yeah. Okay.
So what that's saying is they're taking this artificial intelligence and applying it to mammography, and comparing it with the biopsies, tissue biopsies, and also the more mammography. So there's a connection with the biopsy samples with in vivo imaging. Right, so that's kind of like the in-life X-rays and MRIs and things like that, and we're doing that similar approach within the research field as well. But this is an area where in the diagnostic world, I think that's going to be increasingly important. And again, an image is an image to an AI software, so you can look at city streets and things using AI and count all the number of red cars versus green cars on a particular street, or you could apply it to these mammography radiographs and look at the arrangement of the breast tissue and determine if there's any tumors within that area or any areas that look slightly abnormal. And that might need to be flagged to a pathologist.
Wow, that's really exciting. Just hearing how I'm not going to lie, there are some words I don't understand, but so how you're using it and what you're doing, and especially when you're talking about the toxicology stuff, toxicity, and then hearing just how we're seeing it in labs and helping with that type of diagnosis as well. Is there anything I feel like I obviously understand this a lot more now, besides my Back to the Future reference of AI. But is there anything else, any takeaway you feel like somebody should, when they're finished with this episode, should walk away with?
Well, and not to be afraid of these AI approaches coming forward. They're not going to take over your job or replace you as a scientist or as a pathologist. They're really there as a tool to help you and make you better at what you do. So in the case of like these AI approaches, especially pathologists who read maybe hundreds of cases a day, they can get to a point where they might be fatigued, right? Or their eyes get tired and they have to stop, take a break, and then catch up on something the next day. Where if you're running AI, the machine doesn't get tired, so you can keep feeding this through, and then go in the next day and have all these images already well annotated for you. Then you can go through and do a quality assurance check and a proofread. So these approaches are to free you up so you can use your mind in different ways, or free up your time for another process that you need to do manually. So they're really to augment and to help refine your way of working, to add value.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, and I feel more confident knowing that the AI can't learn without us to some extent. Right. So it still needs us. So that's good to know. All right. Well, that was awesome, Dave. Thank you so much for your time. And I know that you and I have talked about maybe doing another episode on a deeper dive into another one of these technologies that are those phrases are being thrown around, and we want to break that down a little bit more too. So certainly we will get that scheduled on the books for hopefully season 3. But again, thanks for your time, and I just hope you have a really wonderful holiday season.
Yep, same here. Thanks so much for inviting me, and I hope people find this useful. It's really just to break down some of the mystery around these approaches and help to start the conversation, and we'll hopefully continue it at the future NSH meeting in Reno.
I'm sure we will. Thanks, Dave. Have a great day. We hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you have a tip, trick, or piece of knowledge you'd like to share, let us know. We would love to feature you on a future episode of HistoHelp. Have a great day.